Hello, welcome. My name is Ying Lee. I am the community programming producer. Give me 1 second. There we go, that's better. My name is Ying Lee. I am the community programming producer here at the Playwrights Realm. My pronouns are she, her, and we are really excited to have this conversation today about arts philanthropy. Before I begin the panel, I would like to go over some information and some logistics. I would also like to welcome our viewers from HowlRound. The Playwrights Realm is a value-based organization, and we center in our practice the values of being equitable, inclusive, anti-oppressive, and anti-racist. These values also extend to our virtual stage. If at any time you experience something not aligned with those values, please feel free to email me or to send me a message. I'm including some information about our mission and values in the Zoom chat. Connected to these values, we also recognize the additional barriers that caretakers experience. If you incur any caregiving costs while attending this panel today, we will be happy to reimburse you. This is through our Radical Parent Inclusion Project. And in the follow-up email you will receive tomorrow, there will be a link to the reimbursement form. I'm also putting some information about this in the Zoom chat. I also want to acknowledge that the Playwrights Realm is coming to you today from the traditional unceded territories of the Lenape. Colonization is an ongoing process that continues to impact the lives and lands of Native communities. In addition to the physical lands that we occupy today, the platforms, technology, and equipment that we are using consume resources that are based in physical lands and are not universally accessible to all peoples and communities. If you would like to learn more about the land we occupy, I'm putting a link in the chat. We're about to start our panel, and before I do, I wanted to go over some logistics. Zoom now offers captions. Feel free to turn those on. And at the end of the panel, we'll be doing a Q&A. So feel free to submit any questions that you have. There's a little button at the bottom of your screen, the Q&A. Feel free to submit questions using that button. I also want to share with you the event program for today. This has our panelists' bios and their information. There's a link in the chat for that. And now I would like to welcome Conrhonda E. Baker.
Hey there, Yang. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone in the virtual space. As Yang said, my name is Conrhonda, and it's delightful to be in conversation with you today. I'm joining you virtually from the land of the East Cherokee, Yuchi, Muskogee, and Creek Nations, and I do encourage everyone to check out our information in the online program. If you have questions specifically about your organization and our funding, we encourage you to reach out to us directly and save those questions for one-on-one conversation. So our contact information is there. And today our intention is to have a candid conversation about arts philanthropy from an institutional funder's perspective. I do want to share that if you are an individual artist, I invite you to consider attending a session tomorrow called Demystifying Individual Artist Grants. It is going to be held at 6:30 p.m. tomorrow, hosted by my colleague, Celeste Smith, a senior program officer of Arts and Culture at the Pittsburgh Foundation, and the link for that is being shared in the chat. So please join that conversation for a very robust deep dive into individual artist grants. Before we get started, Ashley, Kathy, Nikki, and I thought it was important to sort of share our commitment for this conversation so you know where we're coming from. Today, we're going to speak honestly, We're committed to being honest about our lived experiences as funders. We're going to back our opinions and arguments with facts and reasoning, and we're going to speak with fairness and call out bias amongst each other if it happens to come up. We're going to speak personally. Talking about money and philanthropy is a sensitive topic. My colleagues and I, we're going to lean into vulnerability and potentially share some personal stories along the way. And lastly, we're going to speak directly. Again, if you have specific questions about our individual grant processes, we encourage you to use information on the bio sheet to contact us directly so that we can give you appropriate guidance within the context of your organization or project. So with that being said, Ashley, Kathy, Nikki, come on into the space and share a bit about where you're joining us from today. And I'm going to go East Coast to West Coast. So we'll start with Ashley, go down to Nikki, and then go over to Kathy.
Thanks, Conrhonda. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to those who are joining us. My name is Ashley Firestone. I am a program officer at the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm calling in today from New York City, the Lenni Lenape people's land.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Nikki Estes. I'm the Director of Presenting and Touring at South Arts. I manage several grant programs at South Arts and our dance initiatives, and I'm joining you from Atlanta, Georgia, land of the Muskogee people.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Katherine Banalos. I am a program officer at the Ralph M. Parsons Foundation. I am joining you from Los Angeles, the land of the Tongvan Nation, and it is early afternoon for me here, but happy and so delighted to join you in the late afternoon where many of you might be.
Thanks so much. And Kathy, we really appreciate you representing the West Coast. And if we can start with you and we'll go backwards, what's top of mind for you all right now? You know, our panel is, you know, what's the funder's role? So from that aspect, like what's on your mind? Kathy?
Yeah, no, thank you for this great question. And I just want to thank everyone here who's listening for the generosity of your time, for listening and learning. So what's top of mind for me? To answer it quite sincerely and plainly, as a responsive funder, what's top of mind for me is what's top of mind for you all. We are here to listen and learn. And I would say, especially since COVID, we really just sincerely want to learn about your experiences, your honest challenges, and your aspirations in this time. So I would say a lot of what I have been doing in my role as program officer is listening and learning about what's your top priority. What are you grappling with? What are you challenged by? What are you inspired by in this time? And just really having honest conversations. I think the best thing that I have seen in the arc of these last 12 months is people feeling comfortable sharing with each other that they don't know, or they don't know what they don't know, or making plans and having to change plans. And I think we're all getting, we're living this shared experience together. And so we're listening and learning alongside together. So again, to answer your question, my priorities are really about listening and learning what our grantees' priorities and others in the field are in this moment.
I'll jump in and I will say ditto, but wanted to maybe first share a little bit more about South Arts for those that don't know much about us. We are a regional arts organization located in Atlanta, but we provide grants and fellowships to artists, arts organizations, and communities within our 9-state region, but we also have a few programs that reach beyond those states. Our mission is supporting Southern vitality through the arts, and so as Kathy mentioned, all of those things are so important to us. I would say right now, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility are top of mind for us. Expanding our reach more intentionally to better serve artistic disciplines. There have been areas that we haven't been as supportive of in the past, so we're trying to do more of that. Also trying to support individual artists more directly, because historically our support's been primarily with arts organizations. Listening more, trying to change the way we work, exploring new models of work for us, and just trying to be open. And along with that, being as flexible as possible, being responsive to our grantee needs, as well as our funders' needs as well. We grant funds from the federal government and from other organizations. So that's also something that we have to manage. Trying to streamline our process and remove barriers so that access can be improved. I'll stop there. A lot is on our mind, you can't tell, but I'll stop there for now.
It's actually a great transition, Nikki, to some of what's at top of mind for us at the Department of Cultural Affairs as well, in terms of streamlining, removing barriers, providing access to as many eligible applicants as we possibly can within the 5 boroughs of New York City. I work for a really big bureaucracy, and that can be really challenging. It can also be incredibly rewarding. I love being able to say that we are one of the largest public funders of the arts in the nation, but that comes with a lot of people who are running this work and who have their hands and their hearts and their wallets in this work. So streamlining and removing barriers and improving access, certainly a priority for those of us who are doing this work on the ground with all of you, but can be a challenge in a bureaucracy the size of the one that I operate within. And so to Katherine's point of being responsive and being reactive, if you think of city government, it's a little bit like the Titanic. It's tough to shift. It's tough to pivot really quickly in the way that a private foundation might be able to. We have a lot of stakeholders who need to be brought along with any changes that we make to our process. And so this pandemic period has been a lot of change for all of us. And while I think for some folks that's been really exciting, for others it's been very difficult to manage those changes. And as we are returning to our office spaces, to our performing spaces, to our art spaces, which is bringing so much joy and satisfaction to those of us in New York City, it's also making us question, what do we want to retain from that time? And what do we want to sort of sunset from what came before? And how, in fact, do we do that moving forward? So that kind of change management process is something that we're really trying to work through together, while we're also navigating a lot of change internally. There is going to be an upcoming administration shift in the next couple of months, so we're going to have to figure out like where we sit and where we stand in those spaces. So certainly preparing for a lot of change, but also really taking this opportunity to identify what really our values are at this moment and what's important to us to take with us moving forward into this next phase.
Yeah, that's so good. If I can lean into something that you all sort of maybe didn't say directly in this moment, part of that change has been an increase in a lot of cases in investments, like an actual physical increase in grants, physical increase in dollars. And so I want to sort of camp out there for a moment, if we can, and talk a little bit about where those increases might have come from, if that's an endowment. I know at our organization, our board graciously increased our payout from 5 to about 7.5%, and that's going to continue. So we saw that there. But I know, Nikki, you're an intermediary, and that's a strategy that our foundation has used, is partnering and decentralizing funds into another organization to regrant. So I'm just curious to see, they're talking about changing like the increase in investments. What strategies have your organizations used? And Nikki, if I can start with you and then maybe kick it to Kathy. And Ashley, I know your budget is set by people that you have no control over. So if you don't have an answer there, that's fine.
So yes, Conrhonda, we do have, we're in the middle a little bit. So we received funding from the National Endowment for the Arts. We've also been fortunate enough to receive private support as well. And during this time, we've received additional funds from the National Endowment for the Arts that are more flexible than they have been in the past, which is great. And we've also been very fortunate to receive some substantial funding from private foundations as well. And what we have done with this new money is really try to use it for the things that we normally can't do. And so sometimes we are restricted by federal guidelines. It has some limitations. Most of it is project support. We simply aren't allowed to offer general operating support with our fund, but with the American Rescue Plan and the CARES funding, we've been able to offer general operating support to organizations that we have never really been able to support in the past. And the same for the private foundations. And what we've been doing is really trying to reach organizations that we normally can't reach because of some of the limitations and guidelines that we have in the past, and also offering much larger grants than we have in the past. We've also been able to eliminate the cash match requirement that is normally required for most of our grants. So just using it mostly as an opportunity to be more impactful with larger grant amounts, expand our reach and connect with communities that we normally can't, and hopefully that connection can grow from this point. So just using it really as an opportunity to grow our work and to reach new communities and audiences.
Great. Thank you, Nikki. I would say from my end, again, I'm joining you from LA County. And so the Ralph M. Parsons Foundation, we are a private foundation that funds entirely in LA County in 4 key areas. And the arts is one of 4 funding priorities for us. And I would say the way in which we responded in this time, I would say, is twofold. One is exactly what I think this question was around. How are we investing more and differently in supporting the arts? So our board, which is governed by a group of dedicated civic and community leaders, decided last year and this year to increase our payout in response to this time of increased need. So our responsive grant making budget, which includes the arts, increased to 20 million last year and this year, which is it's an increase from years past, which tended to hover around 17.5 to 18 million. In addition to that, we also were one of the initial funders to contribute to the LA Arts Recovery Fund, which was a public-private partnership to invest in the recovery of arts organizations, small to mid-sized, in LA County. And I would say that's a really great example of ways in which funders not only contribute dollars, but also time, and ways in which they're working with community differently. And so that what I would say, those are 2 ways in which Parsons in particular has invested in the arts differently and more in this time, both through increased dollars and investment in this collective pooled fund, which wasn't meant to displace our regular funding. So just because we said to the Arts Recovery Fund, that's our arts funding. No, we were committed to still continuing funding arts organizations directly in this time. And in addition, we have put a lot of time and sweat equity in developing the fund and working with the field to really listen and learn about how we can best support their needs in this time.
That's awesome. It's so great to hear another colleague, like literally on 2 different coasts, engaging in the conversation about increasing payout. We know that there are some colleagues that we have that couldn't do that, or their boards didn't go for it, but it does feel as if nationally there is a commitment to engaging in the conversation. And so 2 examples for any funding peers who might listen to this call of organizations that have done it. Reach out to us directly if you want to have a conversation about the strategies and conversations we used with our board leadership. And Ashley, I don't want to dismiss government increased. Like, let me give you some due and see what you have. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I'm happy to just give thanks this year to our city council and to the mayor of New York City, Bill de Blasio, who actually increased our budgets in FY22 to be able to restore some of the funding through city council initiatives that had been cut in FY21 and in fact increase above where it had been baselined in FY20. And we were able to do some across the board increases as well that were sort of prioritized based on the impact in certain neighborhoods where organizations were providing services, both based on COVID impact as well as organizations and neighborhoods that were identified in the social impact of the arts project research that we had conducted. So we are seeing small increases. I can't promise that they're going to last over time. And I see the question in the Q&A about where private philanthropy might need to feel the urge to compensate for some of that, especially in areas where maybe, unlike New York City, the public funding is not as robust. So certainly grateful to where the private sector is playing a role in this ecology that we are all a part of.
That's so awesome. I want to shift the conversation a little bit because so much of what we're talking about is based on relationships, right? Like there's our own internal relationships with our board and other program officers. And personally, I know a lot of the people that Kathy partnered with on the West Coast for that relief fund, Mellon Foundation being one, they're based in New York City. A lot of the funders that are feeding into South Arts, we're all connected in many ways. But I want to just put this question out there. Like, what do we mean when we say being in relationship with a grantee or a partner? Like, what are we actually getting at? And I'll let you guys, popcorn it around to see whoever wants to go first. But the power dynamic is real and it's there. So when we say that, we want to be in relationship with you, what are we actually asking for?
I can jump in. I think that for a government funder especially, where our grantee pool, we have an open call every year. It's not by invitation. And so there are certain eligibility requirements, certainly, but we have a very large pool of potential applicants. And from that pool of potential applicants, we have usually around 1,200 organizations that are applying to us for funding each year. For context, there are at most like 12 people in my unit to manage all of that. So and not all of us are program officers. So at times I've had over 200 organizations in my portfolio. And I think that is context that we don't always get to share. I would love to go to each of my organizations every year. I would love to come and visit. That is more days in the year than there are work days. And so in truth, that's not always going to be possible in terms of those kinds of personal site visits. But that's certainly something that we are trying to prioritize, especially as our theaters reopen, as our museums reopen. It's really important to us to get to know both the work that's happening, but also the people that are doing the work, to really be able to help guide and advise applicants on how to complete our application based on what the priorities are of this particular funder. So for us, the relationship building is really important because we can identify aspects of the work that you're looking to apply for that maybe you're not considering. And we can give some guidance on sort of how to frame certain things within an application for this particular funder, because everybody who's giving money out has a little bit of a different way of doing it. So email is great for sure right now. I would say it's the most efficient way to be in touch. But really those kind of in-person meetings, when we can have them, I find to be the most impactful and also the most difficult to coordinate. And so both of those things are sort of true at the same time. And I'm curious, frankly, if my colleagues would agree on that. But that's one of the things that I would certainly recommend, trying to find ways to connect with your program officers, even if it's kind of inviting them to the office and giving them a sense of how your operations work, just so that we can get to know you and who you are, and how we can best support you in putting forward a successful application for these funds.
I agree with everything Ashley said and would add to that it's extremely difficult for us South Arts, covering a 9-state region, to feel connected to our community. I worked with the City of Atlanta Office of Cultural Affairs before and knew almost every arts organization and felt like every artist in the city, and shifting to a regional organization that covers multiple states is really challenging. And so what a relationship looks like for us is really just being able to listen and hear from our grantees. Most of our grants, we're pretty much hands-off. We have a hands-off approach, but we want to hear what's happening in your communities, what's on your mind, what are your challenges, and oftentimes having honest and candid conversations leads us to change, or even perhaps even creating new programs. For example, programs such as our dance initiatives are more than funding. We provide funding, which is critical, but we also provide resources. We connect the participants over multiple years. And these programs have, high contact with us as staff that the other programs don't. And these programs were created out of listening, observing, and hearing a need. So we're trying to fill a gap. These ongoing conversations and cultivating relationships are very vital. And so we are able to do site visits, several, this was pre-pandemic, of course, several a year, and try to connect with as many organizations while we might be in a community. But again, it doesn't even begin to, put us in a position to really feel connected. So I would say encouraging organizations and artists to give us a call, shoot us an email. We certainly don't have the capacity to have daily conversations with grantees, but it's important. And I think just being able to share or offering your honest feedback about programs and what's needed, particularly when we ask, maybe it's in a report or maybe we send out a survey, is really helpful for us. But it's very challenging, but want to just say, we want to hear what you have to say. We want to listen. We want to partner with you. And because ultimately what we're trying to do is support the work that you're doing.
Yes, I echo everything Ashley and Nikki shared, even from the West Coast. But I would just say what I love about when I interact with those who work in the arts, is that all of you sort of intuitively know how to build meaningful connections. That's just sort of the fruit of the work of the arts. And so I would say in terms of relationships with funders, it's no different. It's building that meaningful connection just by being who you are, being honest about your mission, telling the story of your organization and your work. We talk about this power dynamic, but I think beneath that is that we are saying implicit that it is power between who has the resources and who doesn't. And that is really not the starting place, at least in the Parsons Foundation that we operate on. As a starting place, it's almost like a shared power dynamic, because yes, we have resources, but so do you. We value your assets that you bring. Our starting place is the expertise that you have on the ground in the work that you're doing, the mission that you are accomplishing in your work. So that is for us, our starting place. And as program officers, many of us worked in the nonprofit sector for many years. So we bring a little bit of that lens into the work as well. And we approach all of our conversations with a place of, we're generalists. We don't come to these conversations thinking we know everything. We come to these conversations valuing community insights, valuing what folks who are on the ground are thinking and doing. And so I think I shared with my colleagues earlier, there's a reason we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. I think for us as program officers, we tend to try to listen more and allow you to speak, so that we can listen and learn from you about the work. And the truth and reality is we can't fund everything. So part of this honest dialogue is really about how do we find these areas of alignment where our work where our work intersects. It's no different in when you would approach maybe another artistic peer partner where you're having that conversation of maybe where your areas of work intersect. So I would say approach conversations with funders, potential funders, maybe in that same way of where does our work intersect, and how can I learn about you, and how can I let you learn about our work?
That's so good. Something that's coming up for me, and I would love for anyone who would like to come off mute and respond. Please feel free to do so. Is when we're talking about relationships, as I shared, there's a relationship amongst the funding community. A lot of us are members of an organization called Grantmakers in the Arts. So there's a lot of conversation about equity and inclusion, right? A lot of training that happens there. Thoughts about, grant levels, those conversations, intermediary conversations, community foundation conversations. And all of you shared how important it is for you to be in relationship with the people that are currently investing in you, and to, hey, something's happening, like shoot an email, give us an update. Like I like to say, if you would call your auntie or your best friend and be like, oh my gosh, this just happened at work because it's so great. Or, like tell your program officer, because we want to join you in that joy of celebrating a big win. And if there's a real barrier coming up that us as private funders can be nimble about, or potentially a change of scope and work. I know this comes up a lot with the city, like scope is changing, or, intermediaries who have a little more wiggle room, like tell us as soon as possible that a scope is shifting, like let us know. And as we're in conversation about what you're doing, if there is a funder in our community who we know isn't so open and may not respond to emails or may not be as responsive with phone calls, we tend to also know who our colleagues are that may have to operate that way because of their work environment. And that allows us to advocate for you sometimes behind the scenes. Nikki was talking a lot about the grant beyond the money part of the dance programming, and a lot of that connecting. The more we know about who you are, the more we can advocate with you. If one of those people happen to be like, we're like, I might know someone. So I just wanted to highlight that and see if any of my colleagues sort of agree with that as a way to maybe connect with some of our peers who are not as approachable up front. And then also an idea of, just saying for people you are in relationship with, like, can you set up a conversation for me? Asking, do you know so-and-so? Like, could you make an introduction? If they've seen that as a useful strategy, I don't want to say successful, but maybe a useful strategy to initiate a conversation with another peer funder.
I'll just say, probably the most frustrating phrase that probably grant seekers hear is that you meet one foundation, you meet one foundation, you meet one foundation. And so all of us are so unique and different. So to answer your question about, is it helpful to sort of pass the baton or provide that warm handoff? It really just depends, because there's such a variety of foundations and the way staffing and how folks wish to. So I always like to see myself as a resource and a transparent resource. And so and I can, really be honest with folks about maybe what I know the best way to either approach certain foundations, or maybe, how they might think about or talk about their work differently to make it sound maybe that much more aligned with how a certain foundation thinks about the arts. Because I think what we've seen in this time is the arts really can be spoken of through a variety of lenses, both through health and well-being, economic recovery. I mean, there's just a variety of ways in which to talk about your work. And so I think maybe a roundabout way to answer your question is I see myself as a resource, but it's really contextual about how best to connect organizations with potential resources, and or just think differently about how to talk about their work.
I love it. And that's why, Ashley, go ahead, please.
I was actually going to say it's kind of tricky for me to answer this question. And part of that is because we are so conscious as public funders of not giving precedence or priority or privileging organizations over others. We really do believe that every applicant organization needs and deserves as much money as they can get. These are public dollars, these are taxpayer dollars. So frankly, from my perspective, if a foundation were to call me, and I can't say that this happens, but if a foundation were to call me and say, I am looking for a small, organization whose budget is under $50,000 in Queens that works in puppetry, right? Or something like that. I do know organizations that would fit that profile, but I do not exist as a resource to share that information, partially because what if I forget someone? There are so many grantees that it would not be ethical of me as a government employee to give folks just sort of like my thoughts off the top of my head. And so I can't say that those conversations are coming to the public sector very much. That being said, where I do think there is a lot of really great resource sharing is within the field about the work that we are doing. And especially given the fact that we run peer panels to evaluate applications, I think that that's a space too where organizations are getting to know each other, are getting to see each other's work, and are able to, bring that awareness and expertise into the funding room, which is something that we really value from those panelists. So it's a little bit of a side avenue around your question, but that's where I'm sort of thinking.
Nikki, I don't want to leave you out if you have something. Gonna
Well, much like Ashley, we typically don't make recommendations because we also re-grant taxpayer dollars. I will say that for us, we partner really closely with the state arts agencies in our 9-state region. So we will, oftentimes try to share information with local agencies, and hopefully they can really dig down deeper with the organizations or artists that are looking for support and may have more local resources. But we, if we typically don't make recommendations to other foundations, but I will say that oftentimes when you are talking with artists or arts organizations about their projects and they may be looking for a partner to do work, not necessarily funding, if another arts organization or artist comes to mind in the same state or in a different state that I'm aware of their work, I will certainly say, hey, do you know about this arts organization or this artist? And again, that comes from our constituents sharing information about the work that they're doing, the projects that they're interested in, the challenges that they're facing. And so I think this goes back to kind of your original question of communicating with those that we work with, hearing more about the work, and that will, hopefully help us connect you to perhaps other partners, not necessarily funders.
Yeah, that's so great. And I know it's so tricky because it's all so different and we're all positioned, really differently. But the core message is like, please share, tell us what's going on. And when we are in a position to be in conversation, it's great. And it always helps us to know what's going on. So I want to shift a little bit to talking about investing. And I think in this moment, again, please feel free to disagree with me. It feels as if there's an ethos for people that are working in foundations. We want to fund organizations like we want them to win, even before they're positioned to win, right? Like there's an understanding, I think, now that some organizations, because of historical reasons or, COVID losses, might not be positioned to have, to come out on the positive side of their budget if we're just, noodling it down to that one metric. But we really want to invest in them and have faith, right? Like taking trust-based philanthropy one step further to we want to have faith in organizations that they're going to be able to succeed in a really challenging emotional environment right now that is called Earth. So from that aspect, I'm curious to see, are there responses that you guys were able to be nimble and shift that you saw happen in COVID that you really want to see stick and kind of become standard operating procedure? I know there's conversations about adding more panel processes or even participatory grant making, getting more grantees involved in the decision-making process. So I'm just curious to hear from you all if there's things that happen that you're like, oh, I really hope this sticks or goes, more national, or, ideas that you may have of how to get applicants and grantees more involved in the process beyond what we're doing today. Any ideas?
I think I would say, so we've been doing a lot of kind of evaluation of our grant making practices over the course of the last several years, which have included a number of surveys, personal interviews with our grantees, as well as organizations that have been less successful in our process. And some of the major kind of shifts that we have made over the course of the pandemic that I do hope are able to stick. We opened up multi-year funding to all of our applicants over the course of this year, really wanting to support the well-being of the field through the pandemic. Something I'm thinking about and wondering about and concerned about, frankly, is what our field is going to be going through over the course of the next year or so, when there maybe isn't PPP, when there are not these kind of federal supports in place to allow organizations to continue to operate while we're still getting back up to what our pre-pandemic income figures were looking like. So that multi-year funding was intended to be a long-term support, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to continue to have that expanded beyond the pool of grantees who previously had access to that. It's part of our broader effort of fostering equity throughout our practices. And so we're continuing to strive in that process, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to see some more outcomes-based practice moving forward.
For us, I would say, I hope that we become even more flexible than we have been with the pandemic, that we continue to look at new ways of working. I think we're just really starting to experiment with that right now. So I can't say, oh, this worked really well. I hope it stays, because we're, really just getting into the big shift of the way we are working. One of the things that I think is important is that someone mentioned trust earlier, and I would say for us, it's really trusting artists more than we have. Like, our grants in the past have been mostly supportive of arts organizations, and that funding goes directly to the artists. But why can't we support artists directly, and give them the autonomy that they need over how they. So that's something that we are beginning to look at, that I hope does stick around. But I think, just trusting that the artists are going to do what they say they're going to do, that they work very differently than an organization. We know that many of them were left out of, the relief funding. So we know there's a huge need there. And part of our work at South Arts is to help artists survive and thrive in the South, where they don't feel like they're not being supported and have to move to a New York or a California in order to feel supported. So that's something that's really top of our minds, that we're really looking at hard, knowing that we're going to have to completely change the way we work in our processes, and really just kind of leaning into that.
Thank you. I love that. Survive and thrive, because I think that speaks to this question, right? How are we thinking about our work and setting up our grant making in a way that truly supports organizations to thrive? And I would say for Parsons, we have always been largely a general operating support funder. We provide 3 types of support, but I would say that over 50% of our grants in all of our funding priorities are for general operating support. And that has really helped the art sector in this time to survive and thrive. And we have taken a much more compassionate look in and around how we evaluate finances, because we know everybody is navigating. There's no one cookie cutter way in which folks are recovering in this time. And so we're really taking each organization as a unique story about, and really listening and learning how we can best support them with funds. I would say with the LA Arts Recovery Fund, of which we're involved, we are not only giving direct grants, but we're also carving out some resources for capacity building and learning and evaluation for this very reason. And I know those are common components with funding and initiative, but I think the way in which we're committed to providing capacity building is really alongside with and informed by the field and with our grantees. So we're not developing a capacity building program here on the side and then imposing it on grantees. We're really wanting to do, let's just all be real about what's happening. What are your real-time needs? And then how can we best support you, give you the resources, tools that you need to survive and thrive, because we know how essential and vital the arts are for our region.
That's awesome. I'm curious to know if anyone is engaging in conversations or just has personal musings around reporting, in this moment. Our foundation, the Howard Gilman Foundation, our reporting is a question within our next application. And it's a paragraph. It's qualitative. Yes, sorry, I get those confused sometimes. And so we really want to allow the grantee to tell us what they feel is important in that moment. So I'm curious to know if you all are in conversations around reporting, particularly those that are really on the quantitative, side, or anything that you hope kind of sticks.
I would say for Parsons, in this last year and this year, we opted in a show of flexibility to waive all final reports. I think this will be an interim measure, but I think as we return to final reports, it's precisely asking and reevaluating, as I think both Nikki and Ashley, what really is the information that we need from our grantees? What is mutually helpful for us to know in a way that doesn't just feel like extra work or things that are not fruitful? I think we want to do what's useful and fruitful for the work moving forward. So what's that paragraph that we just need to share with each other? Maybe I see reporting as more as a reflection, because we don't often give ourselves the time to really reflect about what we just did, because we're so often in the business of doing that we have to, sometimes the report is an opportunity for me to understand how you're reflecting about the work that you're doing. And so I think we're just open to how we can best mutually get that information. But I know for now, it has been a tremendous gift to our grantees to waive the final report in this time.
I wish we could let go of final reports, but we have not. We are hoping to streamline them. I mean, I feel like our report, I am biased, but I feel like our report is pretty streamlined. From the beginning, we do ask for stats. Our grants are mostly project-based. So we, do feel that we do want to know how many participants were involved. We want to know how the project went. But we are definitely looking at, what are we doing with this information? Is it nice to know, or do we need to know it? What can we do away with, and what questions are really most important to help us improve as an organization, do our work? So we're definitely looking at it. I will say for our general operating support grants, which are just in response to the pandemic, we asked just a couple of questions, just confirm what you did with the money and let us know what the shorter long-term impact is, or, how important was this grant? Not important at all, very important, just so we can get a sense of, was it impactful? Did it do anything, or, move the needle at all? But it's something that we're continuing to look at and haven't found the right answer. So I'd love to hear some solutions from anyone on this panel.
I'll say, and it's not explicitly tied to reporting, but something that has really helped our reporting process, which, agree with Nikki, we are still doing. A fair amount of funding actually is tied to a finished final report as part of our process. And so there is certainly incentive for organizations to complete it. But part of what we've been able to do is actually increase the amount that the percentage rather of the budget that our funding is able to cover. We increased these sort of COVID eligible expenses. So we added to some of our historic, very sort of narrowly focused programmatic expenses to allow for certain anomalies in FY21 and also FY20, just that were based on the pandemic. And so we've tried to be as flexible as is feasible for our agency, and that has come through in reporting. One thing that I wanted to share too is that we're not really making qualitative judgments when we read the reports. We're basically saying this organization said that they were going to do X. Did they do X, right? I'm not saying whether I think that was great or not. I'm not deciding or determining whether I think you should get this money or not. It is a matter of, you said you were going to do this. Did you do it? And if you didn't, let us know what happened that between point A and point B so that we can understand the reason for the change. It's not a judgment zone. It's really just a matter of a qualitative and quantitative review of, you said you were going to do this, and did we get there? And if not, like, how can we support in understanding why not?
That's so good. Thank you for that, Ashley. That's really, really great insight. I just want to open it up. We've had some questions come in the Q&A, and I've tried to weave them in throughout. But I wanted to just open it up to you all. If there's anything that's, top of mind for you as we're chatting that you want to share. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Ashley, please. Oh, or she's helping folks with homework right now, so she might be back. Things that are top of mind for people during COVID: at home childcare and at home schooling. If there's anything else that you want to share around anything we've talked about so far, before we jump into some of these questions more in depth, Kathy or Nikki.
I'll just say another focus for us is trying to better understand and celebrate the diversity of the South and the communities. And so we are trying to connect people and encourage partnerships in a way to either address a community need or celebrate a community. And so it's a different way of working. It's the new program focus area that we started a few years ago, but it really kind of helps us celebrate community engagement in a different way than we had before, more than just, you said you were going to do this project in this community, how did it go, as opposed to this more a deeper connection in the community, and really using the arts to celebrate what a community has or to help address what a community is challenged with at the moment. And those types of projects are so meaningful to hear about and support. And I think that's something that we are looking to do. It's also a balance. We have such a large area that, it can't just be these larger grant amounts for a select few. We want to try to reach as many communities as can. So it's a delicate balance between, perhaps much smaller grants to a large amount to much larger grants to a smaller group of people. But having that balance, I think, is important, particularly as a regional for us. But just seeing and supporting partnerships in a new way and connecting people from different sectors of working has been really important for us, particularly with all this going on in the world right now with equity and social justice and accessibility and just, I'll just stop there. I'm going to start rambling.
I'm here for a good tangent. And so Kathy and Ashley, I want to invite you in, and then I have another question.
I'll just, piggyback off of what Nikki shared, just because I love that she uplifted celebration. And so I would just say as a final thought, that as you're talking in the field, really just always start with your strengths and your assets. I don't want to minimize just the shared struggle and how difficult and challenging these last few months have been. But what I have seen also in these last few months is just really people stepping up. I've seen a level of resilience and support and resourcefulness, and just people showing this. What the COVID has done in the last 15 months have done is just, it has drawn out the assets and strengths that have always been there in the community. And we can now, we don't have to wait till we're on the other side of the pandemic to celebrate them. Let us celebrate and uplift and strengthen while still, attending to all the challenges. But I think both can live side by side. So I just wanted to echo Nikki's thought around celebration.
I think I would just echo your thought, Kathy, on community. I mean, something that we have really seen amazingly in New York City is how many organizations have come together with each other, have bonded together in regular advocacy phone calls together. Early in the pandemic, I think they were daily. For a while, they were like every other day or something, but there are some really, really strong organizing tactics that are being used among the field both to advocate for what they need to governmental entities, but also more importantly, to just form community together and be able to really have those peer-to-peer connections and understand, like, we are not the only ones who are grappling with X, Y, and Z, or someone knows an accountant who understands this problem that I'm having, right? And so those kinds of networks, I think, have really been strengthened in a lot of ways over the course of this pandemic. And that's something that to me is really heartening to see, and something that I hope will continue.
That's so good. I want to gonna segue from there and talking about networks, and a question that came up was around budget minimums, particularly in a lot of places, $100,000 being the budget minimums, and this idea of networks and organizations like Parsons and Gilman that have actively made choices to decentralize funds to get into relationship and to fund networks that have a better relationship with organizations that are in that budget category, because of capacity, staff size, docket size, time, energy, application, et cetera. The question is, does someone with a $50,000 budget need to go through our application process? Like, it's a lot of paperwork. Is that equitable, to them too? And so I just want to stop and Nikki is a perfect, she is an intermediary. She's in the middle of this right now, and see if we can have a conversation about what that looks like. If that feels like there's more of a gelling together of, as these networks coalesce, are we seeing opportunities to invest in them, so that they can continue and grow, beyond relief moments there. So yeah, Nikki.
I'll respond. So part of our mission, or a huge part of our focus and goal, is to reach rural communities. We know that the lack of resources is significant on many different levels. And so we are actively trying to engage communities that are rural. I will say that for us, our grants are, also very small. Typically, we give grants from $500 up until $40,000. And most of the grants that I manage go up to maybe $15,000. So they're pretty small, and we try to make the grant size equitable to the application process. And so we typically don't have budget requirements. And when we have it, oftentimes is because of a need of a partner, one of our funding partners. And so it is a balancing act, trying to make sure that we are being equitable with our grant dollars, which means reaching those organizations that are really small in budget. And how can we do that when there's a minimum budget requirement? And so most often we don't have that, but again, we're talking about very different types of grants for South Arts. Most of the time it is project based. And so, and most of the time it is to support an artist fee. Our grants typically don't support project expenses, only in a couple of cases. So, I think part of it is limited to the way we work as an organization, also because of our funding partners and being a re-grantor. But we are definitely looking at trying to make sure that there is a way for every type of organization that supports the work that we're doing has an opportunity to receive some type of grant from us. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, it was less of a question than a comment with an opportunity to respond. So I appreciate, talking about the rural community. I think that in the arts, we can very often get siloed into the coast, into New York and LA, which like Gilman and Parsons, right? And forget that there is a wide swath of America that doesn't live in urban lifestyle or a suburban lifestyle even, right? But there are rich cultural traditions and rich cultural processes that exist there. And I know, Ashley, this is what you're talking about, like looking at boroughs and looking at communities and getting really clear about narrowing that down as a priority. And so it's heartening, to hear that that's something that's top of mind for you all too, not the usual demographic suspects of who an arts consumer might be.
Sure. And I don't know if my peers want to chime in on this, but one of the things we're looking at is not only streamlining our application and report process with, the questions, but is a written narrative the most appropriate way to receive a response from a grantee? Maybe we need to offer video options or, lots of different alternatives for how they submit information to us. So again, I think it's just there are a lot of conversations that we're having about how can we be more inclusive and equitable when it comes to everything that we're doing, not simply the reach of our grants, but how we communicate, how we receive information, all of it.
That's a good point. And I will say that, we just recently took a look at our application to just further refine and really try to streamline it and make it really simple. And I often have to field calls from applicants, and I like to say, plagiarize yourself. If you've written a great application for another foundation, don't feel like you have to write new prose. If it fits within ours, just cut and paste and put it in there if that helps you. But we also allow for video, and people often do embed links. I'm seeing that more and more often to their videos. And if you ever wonder if we actually look at them, I will say I can speak for myself. I do watch the video links and I read all the optional attachments. And so I think we just leave it open, however you want to share your story, to do that. And yeah, so that's all I'll add.
Well, I want to open it up to, closing thoughts. We have about 5 more minutes before our time together is over. And I'm so sad and so grateful to have been in space with you all. But if there's anything, that's on your mind, or a question, or just, a parting word that you want to share, please feel free. And I will reiterate again, Ying is doing great about posting this in the chat. If you have questions about our individual processes, because they are very different, as you've heard today, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. We are those funders who will answer a call, answer an email, at least try to direct you to a very robust FAQ page, which I know DCLA has, because I have been on it as a former grant writer, and it is fabulous. So just please do not hesitate to reach out to us individually. But Ashley, anything that's coming up for you as we get ready to depart?
I feel very grateful to have shared this space. And I think what I would look forward to moving forward is where we started, is continuing to be in conversation with our applicants and grantees and really understanding what the needs are as we move into this new version of uncharted territory. We have been in uncharted territory for some time now together, and we're moving into a new version of it. And so while we're working through what our challenges are going to be internally within my office, right, with my colleagues at the DCLA, we also really need to know what the challenges are that the field is facing. And the more people that we can hear that from, the better our argument is going to be to understand the breadth of the need. So we're not going to presume to be experts in how to manage a post-pandemic scenario. I have not been through this before. I don't think most people alive have. And so I think that the more open and honest our grantees are with us in letting us know the challenges, knowing, quite frankly, that we probably won't be able to solve all of them, and certainly not quickly, but it's really important for us to understand what they are so that we can attempt to pull together those folks who can help and bring it really forward to understand what the needs of the community are as we really transition through this kind of new world.
I'll just add to everything that Ashley said, just echoing that. But I what I find in this work is that sometimes I find myself saying the community, as if it's, homogenous or monolithic. And really, I come at this work really about help us understand what each organization and every encounter I use, whether it's a phone call or a site visit, help me understand what your journey has been like in this last year. And certainly as we're talking to more and more organizations, you start to see trends. But what I also see is that everyone's journey is unique. So I would just invite you to share your journey, share your story, give yourself time and space to reflect and share we see ourselves as colleagues with you. And so treat us as colleagues and share with us the same joys, hopes, challenges as you would to your peers. And, I hope that we can emerge from this with stronger relationships and better ties. I'm too grateful for this time with all of you as someone, the lone duck from the West Coast. And I hope that we, in this time, this is the fruit of this time. We can have connections like this more often that aren't always tied to a specific outcome or a funding relationship or a new project that we're all collaborating on. What we're doing right now is just building connections. And I think we spoke to that earlier. So I just thank you all for this brief hour of the time that we all intersected to build meaningful connections together.
Now we're almost out of time, so I will just say that, don't be afraid to try something new and to fail. We are all trying to this is all new for all of us, everyone that is here today, not just on screen, but we're all looking for innovation. We all want to see something new happen and come out of this. So give yourself permission to fail. And if you fail, don't be afraid to share that with your funder, because I think now is a time to see change happen, and some of it may not work, but some of it might, and we might end up working in these new incredible ways. So just want to push for innovation and say, try it, let's see what happens, and we'll do the same. So grace all around the room, I think is going to be needed for us.
Yeah, Nikki, you took it right from me. I was going to say, we are part of the community. Like we do say, like we want to, the community, like funders are part of the community, and we are humans too. And we're arts consumers in a lot of ways. Like we're watching things digitally, we're listening to music to cope with this moment too as humans. And so that grace piece all around is really important. And the innovation and, understanding that it takes a lot in this moment to try something new. And it's taking a lot for people to hold steady, and they are both valid and they're both valued. And so I want to thank everyone who dropped questions in the chat. They were great. Those are the things that we want to hear. Like, you have a question, ask why is it this way? Ask a funder you're in relationship with those same questions, and see what they have to say. And chances are they're in a conversation that has to do with that topic. And they're trying new things, or trying to figure out what they can try, or just really trying to hold steady and shore up the ship right now. So I want to say thank you so much to Ying and Roberta, who are off camera. You guys are amazing. I'm going to shoot it over to you for any parting words if there are any. And then if not, I wish everyone a great afternoon on the West Coast and a good evening coming up on the East Coast. Bye.